The learning tonight should be Le'ilui Nishmas Menashe David Ben Yosef, and sponsored by Julian Shaul Kessler, in memory of Max Kessler. As is Hashem, the neshama should have an aliyah. As we are about to begin the festivities of Lag BaOmer, so let's try to understand a little bit deeper what exactly is the avodah of this day, what is the celebration of this day. Let's begin by asking some of the more tangential questions before we get to the more fundamental insight into Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is interesting in that we've mentioned in the past, the Chassam Sofer writes, we spoke about a few nights ago how Rashi indicates, and Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes, how the mon began to fall, or at least the food that came out of Mitzrayim ended on Pesach Sheni, and the mon then began to fall. The shita of the Chassam Sofer is that the mon began to fall on Lag BaOmer. And the question is, why would that be significant? Why is it that the mon falling, what does that have to do with Lag BaOmer per se? We know that the Rishonim bring this concept of Atbash, as we discussed on Sunday as well, that there's a correlation between different Yom Tovim depending on what day of the week they fall out on. So they point out as well that the day that is Lag BaOmer is always the day of Purim. And that's also Haloi Davarhu. What's the connection between Lag BaOmer and Purim? The Shulchan Aruch writes, La'olam b'yom sheyeh Purim Yiyeh Lag BaOmer. What's the connection between Lag BaOmer and Purim? So let's try to understand by first asking a much more basic question. And that is, when it comes to Lag BaOmer, we seem to be living somewhat of a dual theme. If I were to ask you, what is the theme, what is the essence of the day, Lag BaOmer, so you'll probably say one of two things, or both. You'll probably tell me either Rabbi Akiva, and you'll mean that this was the day that the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, or you'll tell me Rashbi, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, this is either the day that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai died, this is the Yom of the Hilula, the Rashbi, the day where he was Megala Rosei Torah, something to do with Rashbi. Well, what is it? Is it Rabbi Akiva, or is it Rashbi? So the question is, and if it's both of them, it can't just be a coincidence that they happen to both fall out on the same day. The day that the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, that also became the day of Rashbi. They happen to coincide? Of course not. So what is the essence of this day that unifies both the aspect of Paskat, Misas, Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, together with this concept of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Yom Dehilula of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? And let me just add on to that an interesting question as well, which I don't know how many people think about, but it's not a strong question, but something very interesting. When we refer to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on Lag BaOmer, very often we refer to him as Bar Yochai, right? The famous Pisman, right? It refers to him as Bar Yochai. Isn't it a bit strange? Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Why are we referring to him specifically as Bar Yochai? A very strange way of referring to a Tana. So I believe that the answer could be found based on a Maimer I saw from Reb Pinchas Friedman, a beautiful Maimer. And it's all based on a statement of the Chidah and the Megala Emukos. You see, we know that there are many similarities between Moshe Rabbeinu and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Many of the Sfarim point out that Arizal even writes that Shimon Bar Yochai was a nitzotz of Moshe Rabbeinu, and what that means is because there are many similarities. They talk about how each of them had to run away from a Kezer. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai had to run away from the Kezer. Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away from Paro. They both find themselves in a desolate area in the Me'ora, in the many different similarities between the life of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and the life of Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Chidah points to an interesting pasuk which highlights this similarity, and the way that he wants to highlight the similarity is in the following pasuk. Pasuk says in Tehillim, Alisa Lamarim Shavisa Shevi. Somehow, Alisa Lamarim, you went up Lamarim to Shemayim Shavisa Shevi, and you took a captive. You captured a captive. So this is a reference, says the Chidah, to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. How do I know? No, Shavisa Shevi, Shimon Bar Yochai. So what is exactly in this pasuk that has to do with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? So the Megala Mukos is marech a little bit more. The Megala Mukos writes as follows: Ra Moshe Masha Yisakin Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Moshe Rabbeinu saw was going to be Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was going to be Misakin. Shayanitza Shaloi. V'lechein k'Moshe Moshe Tiken Hey Svarim. Just like Moshe gave us 5 Svarim. Kain Reb Shimon Chiber Hey Prakim Safra Ditzanufa Ditznayusa V'zes Soid Pasuk Alisa L'Maram Shavisa Shevi Noitrika and Shimon Bar Yochai. So we see that the Kanmoinim, they already have this concept, this connection between Moshe Rabbeinu and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, somehow alluded to in this pasuk of Shavisa Shevi Shimon Bar Yochai. But what does this pasuk have to do with? So if you take a look at Chazal, you see that in fact this pasuk is referring to Moshe Rabbeinu. What episode in Moshe Rabbeinu's life is this very pasuk referring to? Shavisa Shevi. What do you think? Alisa Lamaram, you went up to Shemayim, Shavisa Shevi, and you took a captive. Obviously it's referencing the Gemara, the well-known Gemara that tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu, Shabbos Peites, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to be Makabel the Torah, the Malachim said, no, not so quickly. And Moshe Rabbeinu had to argue with them. Moshe Rabbeinu had to fight with them. And Moshe Rabbeinu takes the Torah and is ultimately victorious. However, the Gemara over there explains it. So the Gemara over there is telling us that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to take the Torah, he grabs the Torah, and the Gemara says, Vishavisa Shevi, that is when he was victorious. V'natanei hoidchal hashamayim. The Malachi Yeshara say, no, keep your Torah over here. Tanei hoidchal hashamayim, and Moshe Rabbeinu is victorious. Now, with this understanding, we can begin to understand, if this is the midah of Moshe Rabbeinu that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai seems to adopt, Shavisa Shevi, that's Moshe Rabbeinu taking the Torah from the Malachi Yeshares, and Moshe Rabbeinu, and somehow Shimon Bar Yochai is alluded to, Shavisa Shevi, Oisios, Shimon Bar Yochai. That means this is the midah that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai continues to, along the path of Moshe Rabbeinu. So let's try to understand this a little bit further. The Gemara tells us in Beseches Psachim, Omer Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what happened was that Rabbi Akiva speaking to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, V'chamisha Dvarim Tziva Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. There were 5 things Rabbi Akiva was mitzav Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Kishachaya Chavlush V'beis HaSurim. Rabbi Akiva is sitting in jail, V'beis HaSurim, he is being held captive, and he is being mitzvah his Talmud Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai what to do. Amr lo Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi lamdeini Torah, teach me Torah. Amr lo Rabbi Akiva, eini melamdecha, I'm not teaching you Torah. Amr lo Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Im einata melamdeini, ani oimer li yoichai abba u'moisrech olamalchus. That's what the Gemara says. If you don't teach me Torah, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm not teaching you Torah. If you don't teach me Torah, I'm going to tell Yoichai, my father. Strange Gemara. And he's going to hand you over to the Malchus. And the Mefarshim all matmiya. He's threatening Rabbi Akiva. First of all, Rabbi Akiva doesn't want to teach him Torah. He was the biggest Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. What do you mean he didn't want to teach him Torah? He refused to teach him Torah, and he says, if you don't teach me Torah, I'm going to be moisa you to the Malchus. First of all, he's in jail already. He's already in the hands of the Malchus. And even if he wasn't in jail, Rabbi Shimon's going to hand him over. And what does Yoichai Avi, what does my father Yoichai have anything to do? What's going on in this Gemara? So the Mefarshim explain as follows, that to understand this Gemara, you really have to understand another Gemara, Gemara Masechah Shabbos, where the Gemara tells us another statement of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and this is where everything starts to come together. Tana Rabbanan, Kishenichnesu Rabbaneseinu leKeren b'Yavne, when Chazal, when the Sanhedrin came to Keren b'Yavne, Amru, they said, right, it was a time of Galus, Asida Torah shetishdakach miYisrael, we're not going to last, Torah is going to be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. Shenemar hinei yomim ba'amnu Hashem Elokim v'shachli Rav ba'aretz le'Rav l'lechem le'tzomei l'mayim kim l'shmoyeh divrei Hashem tishdakach asida Torah shetishdakach miYisrael. Right? They say the Torah is going to be forgotten. Tanya says the Gemara, no. Someone stood up and said the Torah is not going to be forgotten. Tanya, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai Omer, Chas v'shalom shetishdakach Torah miYisrael. Impossible that the Torah is going to be forgotten. Shenemar ki lo yisi shakach mi pizaroi. Ki lo yisi shakach mi pizaroi. That is the mantra of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Torah will not be forgotten. Ki lo yisi shakach mi pizaroi. Soifei tevois yoichai. Yochai, a reference to Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Ki lo yisi shakach mi pi zaros. This is now putting everything together. We understand that Reb Shimon bar Yochai, ki lo yisi, was his mantra, his mission statement in life, which carried his very name, Ki lo yisi shakach mi pi zaros, Seifei Tevlis Yochai, was to make sure that the Torah is not forgotten from Klal Yisrael. And really, I would argue that a specific part of Torah. You see, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Matan to Mekabel the Torah, so the Malachei Asharei say very specifically, we want to keep the Torah here. The Mefarshim explain, they really wanted the Torah down here. They wanted a mitzvah kibbut aveim. They wanted a mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Farshim explain, no, they're very particular. Tnei hoidcha l'shamayim. Give the hoid of Torah. What's the hoid of Torah? The hoid of Torah, the Balaturim says on the pasuk, the hoid of Torah is soid. Basically, they were telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you could go take the halachas, the nigle of Torah. You could take the halachas of Torah down to the human beings. They'll keep the mitzvahs of kashrus. They'll keep all the mitzvahs. But the hoid of Torah, the sisrei Torah, the Kabbalah, the nister shabbat Torah, that's not for human beings. They can't handle it. They're not going to be able to last. They're not going to be able to remember, to be able to... That's all sichli elokos. That's well beyond them. Tnei hoid chel shamayim, the hoid of Torah, the beauty of Torah, the inner workings of Torah, keep that el shamayim, vishavisa shevi. And Moshe Rabbeinu grabbed that as well, saying, no, human beings are going to be able to tap into that. And that became Moshe Rabbeinu's victory, that he grabbed sisrei Torah, the inner workings of the Torah, and was able to bring that down to earth, down to human beings. Comes Reb Shimon bar Yochai, the nitzutz of Moshe Rabbeinu, and his responsibility in his life is to carry out that mission. To carry out the mission. What's he telling Rabbi Akiva? He's saying, Rabbi Akiva, teach me Torah. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm not teaching you Torah. We know how much Torah Rabbi Akiva taught Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. What he's telling Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, teach me the Sisrei Torah. And Rabbi Akiva is saying, I'm not teaching you the Sisrei Torah because it could harm you or because I don't think, whatever the reason might be. That was the argument. And Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai responds to Rabbi Akiva, if you don't teach me Torah, I'm going to tell Abba, I'm going to tell my father Yochai, a reference to Lo Yisi Shakach Mi Pizaro. If you don't tell me, Rabbi Akiva, you're going to die. How is Moshe Rabbeinu's victory over the Malachim going to be sealed? How is it going to be concretized? The Malachim are going to be right. We're going to forget all of these Sisrei Torah if you don't teach me what's going to be with Yochai Avi, what's going to be with Lo Yisi Shakach Mi Pizaro. I'm going to hand you over to Malchus Shamayim. They're going to have a taina on you because there's going to be a chelik of Torah that's going to be forgotten, that maybe the Malachim were correct and never should have been given to us. That's the argument Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai has with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai viewed his mission in life to be able to make sure that Moshe Rabbeinu was continuing Moshe Rabbeinu's mission. To be able to make sure that Moshe Rabbeinu's mission, his victory, his argument against the Malachim was correct. We human beings are able to have the hoid of Torah. We're able to have the beauty of Torah. We're able to understand it, and we're able to remember it, and we'll be able to guard it. Lo yisi shakach mi pizaroi. And that's what happened. When Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai comes to Rabbi Akiva to convince him, you have to tell me, or else it's going to be forgotten. And that's what happens on Lag BaOmer as well. Lag BaOmer, we know, is Hoid Shebe Hoid. It's the week of Hoid. It's the day of Sisrei Torah. And that's the day the Zohar writes, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai came to brought his Talmidim together, taught them the Idra taught them much of the Sisrei Torah. Why on that specific day? Because Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai also, the Zohar seems to say that before he died, he knew that his mission was, he had to pass this on to the next generation. Because his mission was, Lo yisi shakach mi pizaroi. So he gathers his Talmidim together. He says, Ani roitze legalois lifnei hashchina shelo yoyma shebechisar nistalti min ha'olam. I don't want them to say that I left this world without passing it on, because that's my mission, that's my statement, that's what I promised Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu took the Shevi, and he's telling me, Shimon bar Yochai, Shevi, Shimon bar Yochai, it's your job to continue this and make sure Lo yisi shakach mi pizaro, that it's never forgotten. And Shimon bar Yochai takes that mission very seriously. and he convinces Rabbi Akiva that Rabbi Akiva has to tell him, and ultimately before he dies, he is Megal V'Soides to his Talmidim. This is the day of Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is a day where we celebrate the continuity of Torah, specifically the Loisi Shokach Mi Pizarro aspect of Torah, that which the Malachei Asharis questioned Moshe Rabbeinu. And now we say that we celebrate the fact that we're able to hold on to it. We're able to handle it. The Malachim were wrong. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai made sure that we have those chalakim of Torah. So what we're celebrating on Lag BaOmer is the continuity of Torah. That we're able to pass Torah from one generation to the next generation. This celebration of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that he solidified the Kabbalas HaTorah of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Shevi of Torah, the continuity of Torah, that is the same celebration of Misa's Tzaddikim, that same celebration of Misa's Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. We ask every single year that famous question of the Pri Chadash. The Pri Chadash says, what are we celebrating? The fact that his Talmidim stopped dying. You know why his Talmidim stopped dying? Because they were all dead. They had all finished dying. There wasn't one left. So that's why they stopped dying. You're going to celebrate the fact that they stopped dying. It says the Pri Chadash, of course we're not celebrating the fact that they stopped dying. We're celebrating the fact that Rabbi Akiva got up and went to Rabbi Seinu Shebidaram and continued to teach Torah. It's a celebration of the continuity of Torah. The celebration of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the celebration of Rabbi Akiva and Lag BaOmer is all the same yesod. The fact that we know Loisi Shokach Mi Pizara. That's why, of course, we sing Bar Yochai specifically. We don't call him Shimon Bar Yochai. Why? Because what we're trying to highlight over here is the celebration of what part of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? His mantra, which is Sloi Si Shokach Mi Pizaro, the Sofei Tevos Yochai. What he refers to as Shas, when he says, I'm going to tell Yochai Avi, what he means is, my father Yochach, my mission statement, the mission statement I was given of Loi Si Shokach Mi Pizaro. That's what I have to make sure happens. So we say Bar Yochai. We remember Reb Shimon because of his mantra, of his mission statement of Loisi Shokach Mi Pi Zara. This, of course, is why perhaps the mun began falling on Lag BaOmer, because Lag BaOmer is a day of the continuity of Torah, the everlasting nature, the nitzchias of Torah. And that is only possible through what the mun represents, the fact that Rebbeinu Shalom is going to always be taking care of the loim day Torah. That is what allows for the nitzchias of Torah, an appropriate day for sure for the mun to begin falling. And of course, this is the connection between Lag BaOmer and Purim as well. Purim is a day of Hoder Kiblu B'mei Achashverosh, a day of Kabbalas HaTorah, a day where we once again celebrate that even while Klal Yisrael and Golus, they were able to be Mekabel the Torah. The Torah is not dead outside of Eretz Yisrael. They're in Golus, but they're still being Mekabel the Torah. They're being Mekabel the Torah, renewing their Kabbalas HaTorah. Torah will live. Torah will go on forever. The Nitzchias of Torah. So Purim falls out on the same day of Lag BaOmer. All the themes of Lag BaOmer, everything comes together. What we're celebrating is this everlasting nature, the nitzchias, the power of Torah, Sisrei Torah, to be passed on from one generation to the next. That Shikha, the human condition of Shikha, has not gotten the best of us. The Malachei Asharis were incorrect. Moshe Rabbeinu took the captive, Shavisa Shevi. He says there's going to be a Shevi, Shimon Bar Yochai, who's going to complete my mission statement and make sure that these human beings are going to be able to hold on to the Torah forever. They'll never forget it. It could be Misas Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim dying. Rabbi Akiva gets up and teaches more. It could be Rabbi Akiva in the Beis Asurim doesn't want to be Megal the Torah. Shimon Bar Yochai says you have to. Loisi Shokach Mi Pizaro. It could be Shimon Bar Yochai in his last day of life, to gathering his Talmidim, and once again, Loisi Shokach Mi Pizaro. It's all one celebration. It's all the celebration of Hoyd Shebahoyd, all the celebration of Lag BaOmer. Wish you all a good Lag BaOmer. Chananya ben Akasha Omer, Ratza Kodesh Baruch Hu, Lezakas Yisrael, Leficha Chir B'Lem Torah Mitzvah, Shenema Adonai Chofetz Matzivka Yagdil Torah V'Yadir. It's your turn.
Hey. Mystical.
Yeah.